Welcome back to the Trauma in the Brain podcast. I'm Chantell Tilly Anderson, here with licensed professional counselor Matt Lasslo. If you've been following along, you know both of our first and second episodes are now live on Spotify, Apple, and YouTube. Thank you to everyone who's tuned in, left reviews, or shared the podcast. Your support means so much. Before we jump into today's episode, a quick update. We have a brand new logo design we're excited to share, and we're building out a fresh Trauma in the Brain website. The new site will be a space where you can find our podcast episodes and interactive brain fitness gym focused on building a milieu or community and resources all in one place. Stay tuned because that's coming soon. In our last episode, we ended on the subject of forgiveness. It's a word that stirs up a lot of emotions, especially when you connect it to trauma. Today, we're going to unpack forgiveness. What is it, what it isn't, and how our brains and bodies process it. We'll also explore what happens when forgiveness feels impossible and how to begin moving forward toward it safely and healthily. Matt, to start us off, when I think about the word forgiveness, I find myself immediately going to a place of defensiveness. That may be because I don't have a great understanding of forgiveness, and I guess I haven't taken any time to really process that. Can you lay this concept out for me?
Yep, absolutely. And I think it's so cool the way you worded that question and the open vulnerableness of it, because 100% that defensiveness is what a lot of people feel the second forgiveness is mentioned. And a lot of it is because we don't have a good understanding of it, but it's also because typically it touches on a traumatic experience, right? Hurt, pain, and suffering. So I think it's really important that we call out that defensiveness is completely normal. It's to be expected. I always say it's not wrong, bad, or terrible. Feelings can't be wrong. The thoughts behind them certainly can, and that's some of what we'll look at. So for too long, I think forgiveness has sort of been thrown on us, almost wielded like a weapon or an expectation. You have to forgive, you have to forgive. And while that is very much true, without a better understanding of it, oftentimes we can't accomplish it. So I broke this down as I was looking at this presentation and studying it and kind of researching it and how I use it in trauma therapy. I decided to break it down into three concepts, if you will. And what I put forgiveness is an effort, an act, and an experience. The effort of it is, it's not easy. It's not just simply saying, I forgive them. I think we've all had experiences where we might say, oh, I've already forgiven them. And I joke with some of my patients, if you're saying it through gritted teeth, you haven't forgiven yet. If the second you mention it, your blood pressure goes up 15 points, it's not true forgiveness. You're working on it, and that's notable, but it's not there yet. It's an effort also because a lot of times it requires us to review our own trauma, to go back and look at what am I even forgiving? Too often we blame ourselves for our trauma, so we haven't looked at the act of forgiving the person that hurt us because we're too busy trying to figure out what we did wrong. It's an act because there's effort attached to it. Again, it's not just a word, it's something that I do. Forgiving is a physiological act. It changes things in our body. The reason I attach the word experience to it is when we truly forgive, we should feel a physiological change, an expelling of breath, that release, right? It feels like you're, excuse me, taking off a weight, a backpack, a body armor or something. That's when we know we've actually accomplished the act, the experience of forgiveness. And then not having a great understanding of it also means looking at why I'm afraid to forgive, why I haven't been able to, and quite frankly, why I don't want to yet.
Mm-hmm. um, that was great. I have a few thoughts.
Mhm.
Let me just put them together. So I guess wouldn't you need to be in a mindset or a safe place physically and mentally to be able to make it to that point?
Yes, and I have some stuff on that later, but far too often, if we're not physically safe, then forgiveness tends to be pretty stunted at best.
Okay, we'll follow up on that in a minute.
Hmm.
What myths or misconceptions about forgiveness do you see most often? Things people believe but aren't necessarily true?
Hmm. And this is a big, the myths is such a the meat and potatoes of forgiveness because typically when we can't or won't forgive, it's attached to one or more myths. Now, I think if you Googled myths associated with forgiveness, it would probably give you 50. But I picked the four that come up very, very regularly for me in trauma therapy. And I think they can kind of summarize a lot of the other side points, if you will. First and foremost, by far the biggest one that I've encountered that is always interesting and intriguing, but also a little unfortunate to me is forgiveness is saying what they did was okay. That is probably the biggest myth because forgiveness is literally saying what they did was not okay. I tell my patients all the time, if it was okay, we wouldn't need to forgive. Forgiveness only applies when they did something wrong. And and by acknowledging that, that's step one in the healing process if we're applying it to trauma, because we're holding them internally accountable, saying what you did was wrong, right? And I love when there's crossover stuff between mental health, substance abuse, different things. Um, we can't fix it if we don't know it's a problem, right? We can't hold people accountable until we acknowledge, wait a second, I don't think this was right. I don't think what you did to me was okay. So that's by far the one of the most common myths that obviously has to be addressed. We're not saying that what they did was okay or right. It's actually the opposite of that. The second one I put is forgiveness means I have to let them back in, let my guard down, and potentially get hurt again. Again, this one is wrong. The act of forgiveness has nothing to do with repairing the relationship. Forgiveness applies to things that happened in the past. With what you said about safety, I like visual metaphors, cheesy little things that are easy to remember. And one of the things that I put with this one is if somebody attacks me, jumps on top of me, and is hitting me over and over and over and over again, it would be ludicrous for somebody to say, make sure you forgive him every time he hits you. No, I have no interest or willingness or probably even capacity to do that. I'm going to first and foremost focus on getting safe, getting away from the situation. Then we'll talk about forgiveness, no matter how many times I was hit. But I'm not letting my guard down. I'm not letting them back in. I can truly forgive the past every time he hit me, but I can also keep boundaries that says until you've done some work on yourself, we can't move forward with this relationship.
Sidebar. What about like turn the other cheek? Or, Jesus didn't do that. I feel like
Mhm.
he didn't protect himself and he like kept putting himself in harm's way
Sure.
and had to forgive later. That
My ADHD brain loves to jump around. That one, I think, brings up a whole philosophical concept. Turn the other cheek. When, how, and why do I do that? That's not necessarily the same as forgiveness. That's, to me, now this is very much opinionated, right? We're just going off the cuff here. What do you have the capacity to tolerate and toward an end goal of helping somebody? I use this example quite a bit for people. I'm ex-military and so I've been yelled at, cussed at, put down, and quite frankly, literally screamed at, to the point of it's hard to keep your eyes open. But because I have that experience and that level of distress tolerance, meaning you're okay in that situation. I've had patients cuss and swear and get all fired up in session, and I don't tend to hold them accountable for that. I've never said to a patient, "You're not allowed to talk to me that way." If somebody gets triggered because they're dealing with a hard situation, or quite frankly, I bring up the topic of forgiveness and they tell me to stick it where the sun doesn't shine, I'm going to turn the other cheek because I know they're hurting. I know they're suffering. And because I can tolerate that, I can shoulder that burden. And I think we need to look at that because they tell people being spiteful and being open vulnerable, it's an invisible line. Nobody really knows where I'm at. If I have to set a boundary because I can't take it anymore, then I do that. I have no more cheeks to turn, metaphorically speaking. But if in that moment I'm okay, healthy compromise is I can give more than you're giving, but I'm not hurt by it, then I will, regardless of forgiveness.
Mm, that was amazing.
Thank you. So back to the forgiveness myths, I added this one. And this one's hard. And I wanted to pause when I got to this one because it hurts my heart a little bit. Going to kind of call some people out, I think, with this one. But keep in mind that everything in this podcast is to help you, right? Whereas with clients, we have built rapport and trust, and I've had patients say, I know you're just trying to help. Nobody on this podcast necessarily knows us or our intentions, but some of these things are certainly uncomfortable and kind of scary, but nonetheless know that this is the path to healing. I put this that a lot of times forgiveness almost becomes our secret little act of autonomy and defiance. You took everything from me, but you can't make me forgive you. I can hold on to that. That's how I stay in power. And it's true. It's a partial truth, right? That is the last thing that we are in control of, even potentially to our death, right? My life might be fading. I have the choice to forgive or to not forgive. You mentioned Jesus, forgive them, they know not what they do. Would that be my last breath? Should that day ever come? We would like to believe so. Whether or not it would, hard to say. But what we need to maybe make a shift towards is, while that is my last defiant act, and it may be comforting to hold on to that, the healing and empowerment is truly choosing the right when it's not warranted or deserved. I don't have to forgive you, but I'm going to. I was kind of researching different perspectives on forgiveness, and Viktor Frankl, the author of Man's Search for Meaning and a Holocaust survivor, I think he so well articulated this concept, but the mirror opposite of it. And what I mean by that is the last thing that I own is the capacity to forgive and to be happy despite everything you are doing to me. No matter how much trauma, no matter how much abuse, I control how I feel. I can forgive you despite not deserving it, and even when it might upset you. I think that's such a powerful, powerful perspective on this. Myth 3 is forgiveness is not respecting myself, and potentially it's hurting or letting someone else down. When we're talking about trauma and abuse, sometimes it's not me that was hurt, it was someone I love. And in those cases, forgiveness takes on a different perspective. So respecting myself looks like, is it self-respecting to forgive, or am I cowering down and letting them back in when I shouldn't? Very much I can respect myself and consciously choose to forgive, not because I'm afraid, not because I feel like I have to, but because it's right for me. Letting the other person down. This one, again, I feel like pokes at some nerves pretty hard, because too often when we're talking about death, accidental or intentional murder, things like that, I'm not letting them down because they're not with me anymore. It's not relevant and it doesn't apply. That's painful, painful, painful situation. because what as a therapist, if I bring that up, what we're doing is what I call the death of denial, the denial stage of the grieving process. That's being ripped away from me. That hurts. That's uncomfortable, and we obviously have to sort of go at a graded pace for that.
I feel that in my chest.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's a hard
it
one.
doesn't feel nice.
Hmm. And that's where sometimes our brain gets us into trouble, is by trying to minimize our pain. It creates chronic pain. We have to confront that horrible feeling associated with the acceptance phase that allows us to heal. The last thing in terms of that, not letting them down or solidarity, is if we're both hurt by the same person, just because I forgive doesn't mean you have to. And too often it's either you have to because I did, or I shouldn't because you haven't. That solidarity negatively affects both of us, honestly, because if you're ready to forgive, great, do it. Be free from that. If I'm not, I can't, I won't, and I'll get there on my own time. But why would I want to hold you back if you're capable of it? So that's the solidarity piece. The fourth one that I put on here, and again, I feel like this will poke, but hopefully in a positive way. I don't need to forgive in order to heal. I've already healed from this. Why would I bother forgiving? And you notice I kind of sound angry as I say that, because that's typically the presentation I get from people when that comes up. And oftentimes I tell people, I wish that were true, because it even as a therapist, sometimes you get this pause moment where it's like, I don't want to ask them to forgive. That ick, it feels icky, right? You feel the emotions of it. It's just like, God, it almost feels like I'm siding with the enemy, right?
Yeah.
Because we have those myths so deeply ingrained in our head. And in those moments, again, visual metaphors, what I've in supervision when I'm talking to clinicians about why it's important to bring this up, or in those real painful moments when I have to remind myself of this, I've often thought of these type of topics as medical health and mental health sometimes overlap a little bit. It would be the not encouraging somebody to forgive in those pain moments is sort of like having a burn victim. And one of the medical necessities with a burn is to scrub off the dead burned skin. And if you've ever talked to somebody that's experienced that, or even been in the hospital room when it was happening, horrible, one of the most horrible experiences known to humankind, I think. Nobody wants to do that. We don't recommend that, right? It's not fun. But not doing it will kill them. It's an absolute life-saving act. And it's very much the same with forgiveness. I tell people, no, it's not going to be comfortable. It's not going to feel good, but it may very well save your life.
Mm.
That's why we encourage the ones we love to forgive, why we do it for ourselves. So those are the four biggest myths, just sort of recapping. It's saying what they did was okay, that it means I have to let them back in. It's not respecting myself or other people affected by it, or that I don't need to forgive in order to heal.
I have a comment on the fourth
Hmm.
because I'm guilty of it. Why would I take the time to go back to hash it out if the door's already closed and I feel like I've moved past it? And how, I don't have to reach out to them to forgive them. Is there a way to do it without saying, hey, I forgive you?
Great question. It's a great question, and it builds on the topic that we had from earlier. What if that's not safe? Why physically assaults me? Why would I go to their house to tell them I forgive them? No, you wouldn't. um, but would I still say it? I think the theme that you're going to see throughout this is yes. I put in my notes, and I had actually thought I was going to move away from it, but I'm really glad you brought it up, is the difference between closure and resolution. I talk about this all the time with my patients. Resolution is when someone who hurts me or takes something from me repays it, makes it right. And oftentimes, that's when forgiveness is pretty easy, right? To use a non triggering example, somebody crashes into my car, it's dented, the paint's damaged. They pay to have it fixed, they get all the dents out, they get the paint repaired, and then they go, I'm so sorry. Well, typically in that moment, it's quite easy to forgive. It just is. But closure looks like somebody hits my car, drives away. I can't find them. Now I have to fix the car. I take all the dents out. I fix the paint. I pay for all that stuff. That's when nobody wants to say, I forgive them for this. But we still should, and we can. And I'm not going to go find them. I'm going to do that internally. Whether I say it out loud, that may be a thing, but I may not say it to them, especially when it's an unsafe situation.
That was a wonderful metaphor. Why is forgiveness such a powerful yet complicated topic for survivors?
Yeah, and that one builds on the closure versus resolution. And here's where I think it gets even harder to look at forgiveness. And again, a somewhat uncomfortable call out. Oftentimes, we'll use the non-triggering example, but then maybe actually use some real more triggering ones, depending on how we feel about that. When somebody crashes into my car, damages it, and now it's not running, and I don't have the money to fix it or the capacity to fix it, do I forgive before that's fixed? For many, many people, the answer is no. That unfortunately becomes the hindrance to our healing. Unlike the car metaphor, I don't need to forgive to heal, to fix that. I need money and a mechanic, right? But when somebody physically, emotionally, verbally, or sexually abuses me, now I have wounds. And those wounds can last a very, very long time. Far too often, the internal belief, perception being that I will not forgive you until I've healed this or until you've healed it. If we're waiting on them to heal it, I always encourage my patients, that is not healthy. That is a monumental waste of time. Why would I wait for the person that hurt me to heal me? I don't want them to heal me. I kind of don't want you anywhere near me, oftentimes, right? But I have to heal, and forgiveness starts that process. So when we say I'm not going to forgive until I've healed, it's counterintuitive. It won't work. We have to start forgiving oftentimes before we've healed because it helps the healing process. Again, an uncomfortable call out. I tell my patients all the time, I'm not telling you this because it's right, fair, or because I want the perpetrator to be healthy and happy. I don't. I don't. I tell people, all the time as a therapist, it's like, man, I wish society or something would hold this other person that we're talking about accountable. But I can help you heal regardless of whether they do or not. You can heal. You can fix this situation. So that's a big difficult part. Oh, here's the last one. In terms of accountability, closure versus resolution, if I've forgiven somebody, am I still allowed to hold them accountable? I would say unequivocally the answer is yes. When we are talking about trauma, physical, sexual abuse, can I call the police and tell them what happened? Yes, and you should. And doing so does not mean you didn't forgive. Forgiveness is that effort, act, and experience. It does not dismiss accountability. It doesn't. That said, tying it into what we've talked about earlier, if I can shoulder it and I don't need to, maybe you don't, but there's a lot of factors that come in then, harm to other people and that kind of stuff. So far too often, one of the additional myths that maybe comes up is, well, if I forgive them, then I can't hold them accountable legally or practically. And I would argue, yes, you can, and maybe should.
What are some of the biggest barriers that keep people from moving toward forgiveness?
And I tie two parts in here.
Hmm.
As I was looking at this and sort of pondering it and even doing some research on it, I decided to look at forgiveness, the word itself. And I just sort of for fun looked up how many times is forgiveness referenced in the Bible, because obviously when people think of forgiveness, regardless of religion or not, you kind of think of that, right? Lots of examples there, lots of challenges for people to forgive. But I looked up, is it always used the same? And I think what came up was super powerful. And I put in my notes, I think somebody with a more academic mind than mine could do some research on this and maybe really turn this into something. But it's very much used differently in different situations. The two thematic points that came up was the Old Testament, it's more commonly used in the Hebrew language. Obviously, it was written that way. And then the New Testament being in Greek. And I wrote down, let me pull up my notes. In the most common Hebrew version is to cease blaming. The Greek is to let go or send away. I think that gives us a lot of guidance.
Hmm.
To cease blaming ties into what we talked about. I have to heal myself. The perpetrator doesn't. Oftentimes, I'm unintentionally blaming them for my situation when what they did was absolutely wrong and created pain, harm, damage. It's my responsibility in the present to fix it. I have to stop blaming them for where I'm at emotionally, physically, or practically in order to start working on it. Again, I'm not freeing them of the blame. I'm freeing them of the responsibility because I know they're not going to fix it and I can. So, forgiveness in Hebrew, to cease blaming in that situation, has a lot of application. The other one, which could again almost be two separate acts with the words being different, to let go. That one is unfortunately one that kind of gets wielded like a weapon. You need to let it go. Well, what does that even mean? But I think if we break it down, it does have application. What am I letting go of? I'm letting go of the pain, the misery, the anger, the frustration that's not serving me anymore. I'm putting those things down. Again, it's an act, right? I'm putting that down. Very different than repressing or pretending. Again, if you're saying it's fine and every muscle fiber in your body is tense, then it's not fine. But to actually say, I'm not holding on to this anymore, putting it down because it's for my survival, it's for my health, that is super beneficial and important. The big barrier that often comes up is literally language. That's unforgivable. We use that term very often. And I went to a really cool training years ago. It was called Mending Broken Hearts by White Bison. In it, they talk about the four directions of forgiveness: basic forgiveness, forgiving the unforgivable, forgiveness of self, and forgiveness of others. And I love forgiving the unforgivable because linguistically speaking, it's an oxymoron, right? You cannot forgive that which is unforgivable. But what the program talks about is nothing is unforgivable. We've termed it that way. And in doing so, it becomes a self fulfilling prophecy. When we call it unforgivable, we won't forgive.
I still feel, I guess, defensiveness towards forgiveness.
Mm-hmm.
I'm still feeling it. I don't feel it that it's resolved. I don't know.
And what we'll look at is towards the end, I put some stuff in about how to check in on that, both personally and therapeutically, because it's typically tied to one of the myths. And we can directly apply that. Why is this unforgivable? If we ask that question, then the answer that comes up is usually associated with a myth. It was too big. He hurt me too bad. He never apologized. Those kinds of things come up that we can then challenge and say, that's not relevant.
We've kind of covered this almost indirectly, but how can someone work towards forgiveness without putting themselves back in an unsafe or unstable situation? And I know you kind of explained it's not necessarily required to forgive. You don't necessarily have to put yourself back in a unsafe or unstable situation, right?
Correct. And this is a great topic for forgiveness. Recognizing the myth, you can forgive without putting yourself back in an unsafe situation. When looking at whether or not I should put myself in an unsafe situation, should I trust them again? Should I continue this relationship? I have patients ask me all the time, particularly in domestic violence situations, unfortunately, do you think he'll stop? Do you think she'll stop or start doing better? And I sort of jokingly poke at that by saying, well, I can't answer that as a yes or no, but let me ask you this. Is he or she in counseling working on not doing that anymore? Are they seeking spiritual guidance from somebody they respect and trust that's going to help them and challenge them on those behaviors? Are they doing any personal work? And if the answer is no, then I tell people it sort of doesn't, I don't see how they would. It's not to say that they can't or won't, but currently they're not. Again, non-triggering stuff. Could I ever get to the place where I can bench press 300 pounds? If somebody says, "Do you go to the gym?" No, then no. Like, it's never going to happen, right? Even if you go to the gym, it may not, but let's rule out the obvious, right? So too often we're looking at putting ourselves back in that situation because we've forgiven, but we have not looked at what they have done. And that's often ties into trauma because we think that we need to change. It's called victim blaming. We do it all the time. Well, I just should have done a better job making dinner for him, or I shouldn't have told her that because it upset her. No, you don't work on you doing differently to get treated better. You make sure they're doing the work they need to do. We can work on forgiveness without putting ourselves back in a bad situation, or by bad, unsafe.
A lot of advice out there says to just leave when a situation is toxic or abusive. But what about people who can't leave, whether it's for financial, cultural, or personal reasons? How do they navigate forgiveness?
Great question. And the just leave has been pretty adamantly attacked in the psychological community. In fact, but maybe arguably not enough. I think we do still have clinicians, friends, family members saying that kind of stuff.
I've just come around to
Yeah.
really understanding it, and I'm
Mhm.
32. So
Yeah. Well, what I typically say with that is there's a really cool article out there for clinicians. I suppose family members, friends could read it too, called "What is Empowerment Anyways?" And it looked at the religious, financial, practical, societal reasons why oftentimes people can't leave domestic violence situations. What the article talked about is, obviously, if you're a clinician, make sure you're addressing all these points, and if you haven't, don't even bother telling them to leave. Which, by the way, as a clinician, I would say it's not our job to tell people what to do. I don't think your therapist should ever be telling you to leave a relationship. They should be supporting you if that's what you're working on, and, you know, working on safety if you're not, because it is such a difficult thing. That said, in terms of chances, how many chances do I give them? Well, if it's a safety issue, arguably none. If it's a emotional or something else, as many as I can take. But because the topic is forgiveness, I tell people, if you're in an abusive situation, every time they abuse you, forgiveness is warranted. That said, focus on safety first. get yourself away from the situation. That's going to make it a lot easier to work on forgiveness. And you can re-enter the relationship if and when they've done the work. But with the topic of forgiveness, don't wait till they do all that work of recognizing a problem, changing their behaviors for you to forgive. You do it as soon as you're safe. Whether or not they do the work or not determines whether or not you let them back in. It doesn't determine whether or not you forgive.
So letting them back in is not a requirement for forgiveness.
It's not.
I,
And very often it's not indicated. They haven't changed and they never will. I've sort of joked with people with this topic, I always use Jeffrey Dahmer because he interested me and I had to write a paper on him when I was in my master's program. And I've said to people in terms of healing, as a counselor, I believe in giving everybody infinite amount of chances, right? Because I'm not the one they hurt. And if while he was in prison, he had said somehow reached out to me, and said, I want to work on healing. I tell my patients all the time, I'd have been more than happy to meet with him. However, I'd have made sure he was handcuffed to the table the first few sessions, right? Like, I'm sorry, you committed a lot of murders, hurt a lot of people. I want to help you work on forgiveness of self. I want to help you work on the elimination of shame and that kind of stuff, but there has to be some practical accountability here.
I think it's really important to mention in a situation of forgiveness, whenever I've had to have like some type of charged or confrontational type of conversation, I was lucky enough to get a situation where I got to talk to the person that I felt like hurt me
Mhm.
about it. And basically, they got to tell me how I had hurt them. And it was kind of like a double-sided forgiveness thing. But we met in a public place. We went to breakfast.
Mhm.
Instead of going to either person's house in a private place, we did it in a public setting.
Mhm.
We laid out the ground rules. Like, hey, these are the boundaries. This is what I expect. And if you can't meet those boundaries, then I can't have you in my life. And I actually, I kind of forgot about it up till this point, but it's been successful. Every
Mhm.
part of that has.
Yeah.
But I had to realize I have the control and the power to decide how they're welcomed back into my life, in what capacity.
Yes. And I think that last point that you mentioned of it's my choice helps.
Mhm.
Because when we tell people you have to forgive them, I jokingly tell people, human beings are defiant by nature. And anybody that knows me immediately says, "Oh, pot kettle, kettle black." And I tell them, "Yeah, I can own that. I know this to be true, right?" Um, but it's not just me. It's human beings in general. We don't like to be forced. It's uncomfortable.
I mean,
Which,
I've been on guard this entire recording because of it.
right. But when we go, wait a second, no, you don't have to forgive, but it might be extremely beneficial for your mental, physical health. And here's what it looks like, not what it isn't. All of a sudden, you kind of get this that feels attainable, that feels real to me. So, yeah, we have to challenge that and look at that as it is absolutely our choice.
This is a perfect segue into the next question.
Mhm.
What does research say about the mental and physical health benefits of forgiveness?
I love this question because I work at an integrated care clinic. Right? Medical health affects mental health affects medical health, and stress affects both. So I don't do a lot of references too often, but I went and found somebody else with more credentials than me to reference because I feel like at this point, I've been in integrated care for 13 years. There's no question to me that it has physical health benefits, but to hear it from a doctor usually carries a little more weight than a counselor, right? What does a counselor know about medical health? So the health benefits are almost infinite. And I found an article by Karen Schwartz of Johns Hopkins University. And I'll read this because it just summarizes it so succinctly. Forgiveness can heap huge rewards for your health, lowering the risk of heart attack, improving cholesterol levels and sleep, reducing pain, improving blood pressure and levels of anxiety, depression, and stress. From a legitimate medical facility, right, with medical credentials. The physical implications of forgiveness are infinite. I've often, and unfortunately lost the article when a computer crashed, but there was another one that said there was a heart transplant facility, hospital back east. I can't remember the name of it. I honestly can't. But it said that they do anger screenings before doing a heart transplant because they have found that anger is highly correlated with rejection of the transplant. And so, what reduces anger? Forgiveness. Physical implications go on and on and on. Again, anecdote versus science. I can't remember who said, not forgiving is like drinking poison, hoping somebody else will die. Why have we gotten away from that concept? It's so true. I have every right to be angry if I was traumatized, abused, hurt. I have that right. No one should be questioning that. But what we should be questioning is staying in this place of anger, resentment, hurt, doing anything for me physically. The answer is no. Dr. Schwartz's article is not the first to look at this. The ACEs study, which connected trauma to physical health problems throughout the lifespan, very well painted the picture that trauma is correlated with physical health problems. But I think what too few people, professionals and general public alike, don't account for is if trauma is associated with this many physical health problems, then what does healing forgiveness do for the physical health? Well, it's the reversal of all of that, right? The capacity to heal through forgiveness and trauma therapy. I mean, obviously, I'm a little biased. I'm going to put that thumbnail in there, but the capacity to heal our physical ailments is huge. We know it exists. I don't think we have any idea how far it can really go.
Can practicing forgiveness help reduce trauma symptoms like anxiety, depression, or hypervigilance?
This one is a good question, a somewhat complex answer. I put directly, for me, the answer is yes. Here's why. Forgiveness is putting the event in the past. We talked earlier about, obviously, if somebody's actively assaulting me, I'm not going to work on forgiveness. Hypervigilance is oftentimes because the past has become the present. I feel unsafe. Charlie Daniels had a song, Still in Saigon, that he wrote about Vietnam survivors and the way they behave like they're still in Vietnam. And so the act of forgiveness says, this is not my present, this is my past. That doesn't reduce or minimize or not, excuse me, dismiss my symptoms, right? It's not saying that it doesn't still affect me. But by putting it in the past, we literally have a reduction in hyperarousal. We have a reduction in anxiety because it's like, I'm safer than I was then. So yes, forgiveness almost immediately has direct impacts on anxiety and depression. That said, there are some elements that go beyond forgiveness. And what that might look like is tying in, previous sessions. Trauma negatively affects our view of ourselves, our view of the world, or both. If it affected my view of the world, meaning men can't be trusted, right? Or women can't be trusted, whatever, then obviously I'm going to have to do some intentional work to heal that. The act of forgiving that one person who hurt me is going to be beneficial, but I may still have anxiety symptoms associated with everybody else. So what happened in the past is likely to happen in the present. So that creates fear. So forgiveness, yes, it will help with reducing anxiety and depression in lots of direct ways, some indirect ways as well. But it may, well, not may not be, it's not entirely the act of healing myself.
For someone listening who feels forgiveness is impossible right now, what can they work on in the meantime?
Well, ask yourself, why is it impossible? Because the answer is it's probably associated with one of those myths, right? And the second we identify which one or all of them, then we can start to address it. And that's what, unfortunately, I think therapists and religious leaders and friends and loved ones alike have failed to do. We've told people you need to forgive, but we've not stopped to ask them, why not? Why are you not forgiving them? What's holding you back? Because whatever it is, we can help them address that. Then the forgiveness happens. It's just like asking somebody to do a backflip and not explaining to them what a backflip is, let alone strengthening the muscles they need to do it. It's why so many people, I think, are aversive to this topic. It's been shoved down their throat with no love, kindness, or support of actually accomplishing it. So when we say, why haven't you forgiven? Or we ask ourselves, why am I so aversive to this? What am I afraid of? What does it mean to me? Then we can get useful answers that move us in that direction.
What's one message you'd want our listeners to carry with them about forgiveness and healing from trauma?
So I wrote this one down, and I was told myself I was going to read it because I literally got emotional writing it. I put the message that I want is, and this is what I sort of love about trauma therapy. It feels so I feel grateful to get to do it and be on that journey with people. There's nothing that's more meaningful and empowering for me than for a person to regain their power after trauma, abuse, or tragedy has stolen it from them. And it's time for people like that to take back your health, your freedom, your happiness, and every other positive thing the event stole from you. Forgiveness, unfortunately, is how you heal. It's how you empower yourself, and it's a huge step to ending a horrendous cycle of violence in the world. And there's no time like the present.
That's beautiful. As we close this episode, I want to remind you forgiveness is a process, not a performance. It takes time, compassion for yourself and others, and the right support. You can find our podcast on Spotify, Apple, and YouTube. Keep an eye out for the new Trauma in the Brain website launching within the next few months. Then you'll find brain fitness tools, resources, and ways to connect with our growing community. To our listeners, thank you for taking the time to learn about your brains. And to Matt, thank you for that wonderful closing statement and for helping us navigate through another important conversation, this time about forgiveness. Until next time, take care of yourself and remember healing doesn't happen all at once. It's one step, one rep, and one choice at a time.